Hello, everyone.
Yes. What a way. God, keep this in.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trout Spinners podcast with your hosts Miles Pennell and Gary Forrestal. Nice to be back, Gary. We posted a Patreon, the first Patreon episode in an attempt to try and lure some people in. So it got upwards of two. I think $2 people were lured.
One of them paid $1. I know that, but yeah, we posted the first Patreon show on our normal Twitter. But do check it out. It's not necessarily the best show. It's just that happens to be the first. So there's better ones, even than that.
Imagine that. So what are we doing today, my friend?
Well, today I feel like I'm actually introducing. You'll hear me introduce in a second a special guest because we've got a guest today. His name is Tom Fordy, Telegraph journalist, and he wrote a piece about the XFM shows. And we love it. I think it's fantastic. And I would urge you all, Mars is posting the show. You will post a link, won't you?
Of course. Forum, it's my job, mate. It's my job.
On the feedback page hub. You know where it goes that I don't know, I don't understand. Read the article. It's great. And I think, obviously Tom and Mars and I, we're all fans of the show, but a lot of what Mars and I have kind of been saying, Tom has put in this piece, but he's far more articulate than we are, and he's got his own nuanced points that are really good. And he was he not just a lovely bloke?
He was great. He was a really great guy. And what I like about this interview, because we often talk to people who have affiliations with Ricky, Steve or Carl, or who have worked at the station or in broadcasting in some way. But it was just really great to sort of like geek out with someone who knew the shows as well as we do, and just have a sort of a nice general discussion, really, just remembering and, reminding ourselves why we love the XFM shows.
Yeah. Now he's in a proper media position. He's done a very good other pieces for the Telegraph and other publications. His article lends like this official voice, this official seal of approval on the XFM shows, because no one else in media, officially properly in media, unless they were directly involved in the shows or know Carl or Ricky or Steve personally, really I've ever come across as a fan. So he's a fan, he's a great journalist, and it was nice to kind of sort of geek out. It's nice with a guest where you can just use different lines from the show, and they you don't need to explain it. They know what you mean. So,
but this is the interview, so do enjoy it, and we'll see you at the end for a little debrief.
So this week, Mars, we have a very special guest, a very, very special guest, a renowned TV and film journalist, Tom Fordy. He writes for the Telegraph. He's London-based, former Men's Magazine editor, and his interests include apparently literary works of the 20th century and new wave European cinema. He's great, and the reason we got him, he's written a fantastic article. We're going to put it in the link to the description of this show, so please go and read that. It genuinely is fantastic, and I'm not just saying that because he's on, but we're going to talk to him about that and other things. He's a fan of the XFM shows. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Sorry, I sort of snorted over you as you were doing an intro there. I was wondering where you dragged up that information on me.
Oh, well, actually, Mars found that for me. So, yeah, I don't know. Is that true? Is it true?
I'm pretty sure that was written ironically. I think the full quote might have been something like "New Wave European Cinema and the Career of Hulk Hogan."
Oh, yeah,
that's the one.
That's what Mars pasted for me. Oh, okay, we believe that. So Tom, what do you think of Hulk Hogan's how do you think he's doing recently? I'm joking.
I could do a whole podcast series on that, mate. Easy.
Oh, well, that's for our other podcast. But you're a fan, aren't you? You're a fan of the show, and your article kind of it's not gushing praise throughout only, and it's not slagging it off only. It's kind of, I felt it was very measured and kind of took into account a lot of different factors about offence and how we saw offence then and how we see it now. What would you sort of sum up your feelings about the Ricky Gervais show were?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was interested to find out that you guys did this podcast, because I thought for years I felt like I didn't know anyone else who listened to it really. It just felt like a sort of private thing thing that I listened to over and over and over and over again. And as the years have gone on, it sort of dawned on me that actually some of it is just so outrageously of its time and sort of, you know, out of sync with what we feel is appropriate now. And it was always amusing to me that it had never been sort of dredged up. You know, whilst sort of historical crimes against political correctness were being sort of raised about, you know, 40 Towers and Little Britain and all that sort of thing. And I think it was amazing that it never sort of surfaced, because it's just, I mean, it's absolutely hilarious, but it's just so of its moment. I absolutely love it. I mean, it just makes me laugh so much, and I've listened to it in a cycle for, I mean, years.
How did you discover it? Did you listen at the time when it was live?
No, I mean, I was always big into Gervais and Merchant from when The Office was first on, so I probably went backwards from the proper podcasts that they did afterwards, and I would have probably listened to that first, and then probably searching through YouTube to find podcasts. Probably stumbled upon XFM then, because I mean, I grew up in Bristol, so I was not sure XFM would have been on my cultural radar at that time. So it's just like that really, and I just sort of carried on. I mean, that was years ago.
Did you meet Steve in Bristol at all?
I know. I'm from the other side of Bristol to Steve, so even our
Gaze Avenue
are slightly different. But no, I mean, I've come close to interviewing him a couple of times, and I did reach out. I would have liked to have interviewed him about XFM for that article. I mean, I didn't think I was going to have any luck there, because he's making Offenders in Bristol, I think, at the moment. So
that looks quite interesting, actually.
Yeah. Well, the idea of Christopher Walken sort of roaming around Bristol is
I know.
So
just wild. He's such a huge star, and he's such a charismatic, iconic actor, isn't he, as well? I've never read like any sort of press or articles or any kind of deep analysis of the RSK shows, and I was just like, why do you think that is, and what sort of compelled you to write about it now? Because the people who listen to this show, they're just so obsessed by them. Like, as you said, you know, Ricky, Steve, Carl, they didn't really talk about it. We as fans, that we're all just communicating via blogs and, you know, Reddit forums and stuff. I guess it's just like, why were they ignored? Like, why? And then why did you write it?
Yeah, well, I suppose the reason, that they're just not as well known as their sort of more mainstream stuff. And particularly, I guess, because they did those podcasts afterwards, which were just so popular and so famous and well received. I mean, I guess I do feel like they've, Ricky and Steve have probably, I'm saying Ricky and Steve, I don't know them, but
Mr. Merchant.
I feel like maybe they've left them behind, the XFM stuff behind a little bit. They don't seem to trumpet them very much. And the reason I wanted to write, I mean, it was just something I wanted to write about, because I think there's a lot to say, because they factor into a really interesting spot, I think, in their careers. And I mean, it's funny when you watch Gervais' stuff now. I mean, he's literally doing the same jokes that he was doing in XFM 20 years ago. So the XFM shows tell you a lot about them as comedians and their observations and what they find as funny and the sort of material they want to do. A lot of it is kind of there in the XFM shows. And I was keen to write about it, because I was talking about trying to do this well over a year ago, writing this article, because there was a lot of stuff at the time about cancel culture and offence within comedy, and, you know, as I said, historical crimes against political correctness and that sort of thing. I thought, well, this would be a good thing to write about, to sort of see how it stands up. And it ended up getting sort of put back, and it didn't happen. And then, of course, the Office anniversary came up. So it was a good time to revisit the show and sort of say, well, everyone's talking about The Office, but here's something else they were doing at the same time, you know. And I did end up doing an article. I don't know if you saw this, but I ended up doing an article about all the co-workers at Wernham Hogg as well. I got to interview a lot of those sort of background characters, which was great.
I think you're like us in a way, because when you read your article about the XFM shows, it's so clear and obvious that you are a genuine fan. Like the quotes you pull up, you weren't sort of, your commissioning editor didn't say, oh, write a show about this, and you kind of went off and listened to a few shows. The quotes you've picked, like, and sort of peppered throughout, are just perfect, and you'd never know them unless you were a genuine fan of the show. And what you said about you thought it was just you, it was just like your weird little obsession, and no one else was interested in this. That's what we found a lot of our listeners kind of have said to us, you know, when they get in contact, that they felt it was just them, and they're actually like, it's great to discover they're part of a community, a wider community. So kind of, I think your article will, if anything, I mean, it would certainly intrigue someone who hadn't listened, I think, and pull in some new listeners. But we are kind of part of a bit of a weird obsessive club, and it's very obvious that you are actually part of that club, which is, I think you're the first official person who actually writes for a paper, who actually gets it. Genuinely knows about it. Like, we've never, that's what I think, it's never been officially sort of talked about or written about this show before, but this article is exactly, a lot of things you said we've been saying.
Well, thanks for saying that. I to be honest, I probably could have written twice as much. So many moments that I would have liked to have talked about and covered, to really get into. I seem to remember I only briefly mentioned, one of the best bits is hearing about Carl's life, or his back, his sort of growing up in Manchester. I mean, you could get 2,000 words out of it. About his dad, and all that sort of stuff. There are like specific lines that I look forward to coming when I go like on a full cycle of the show. There are very specific lines that I just look forward to hearing. And we're talking, 4 or 5 words sometimes. And they just go round and round. I've made a note of some here actually.
Yes,
give us some favourites.
Like, because I always like the stories of like Carl's life when it's stuff like when he's gone on holiday with Suzanne's parents, or he's gone to Lanzarote. The thing about when he got the plumber around and he's bad-mouthing the plumber on the radio.
Yes.
And he's like,
I love this too.
There's stuff like that which are like, but some of the lines is a thing where Carl says he's moaning about the fact that he's had to buy all this stuff for Suzanne for Christmas, and he said, if you're going to start totting up, and every time he says that,
what is it, like 46 quid? Shoot.
Yeah, you basically treated like a horse. He fed her and clothed her.
Another line that I always really look forward to is when he says that the BAFTAs is one of the worst things he's ever done.
Oh, that's good.
The line
such a great line.
And spending all that money on a suit just to go for one night and never wear it. I haven't worn it since.
I think they resonate so much, these lines, because we would never sort of say that to someone, in polite society ourselves. But I can totally relate to that, it being such a tedious experience to sit there for like 4 or 5 hours when it's nothing, you're not getting up on stage. And I think, I don't know, do you feel we can kind of relate to Carl in a way that we wouldn't necessarily say ourselves?
I think the thing about it as well is, like how The Office is basically, it sort of changed the way that a generation talked in a way. Do you know what I mean? There are like mannerisms and Gervaisisms and stuff that you like. I mean, I do it all the time.
Me too.
I watched the Animals stand-up going back a while for the first time in years, and I couldn't believe how many mannerisms and lines from that I thought I'd forgotten that's where, like I say that all the time, and I've forgotten that's where it came from. And I think the thing with Carl and the XFM shows, it's almost like an extension of that. So if you're big into those shows, you probably have there's like another lexicon of those sorts of Gervais quotes, which sort of infect how you talk day to day. And I'm pretty sure that every time I say the word mental, which is a lot too much. It comes from Carl saying about Monkey News this week. It's been mental. I'm sure that's where it comes from. So it's almost like it sort of broadens this sort of influence of sort of the Gervais and merchant comedy.
That is so true. I find myself going, nah, true, baby. I do that so many. Adam, baby, at the end of every sentence. It's that slurring that Gervais has, isn't it? It's just
that's slur. Do you ski, yes or no? I often ask people that. Do you ski, yes or no? I just love, it's just great question. But you're right. Miles and I kind of, before we started doing the podcast, and we thought, this would be a good. Actually, this is what we should do a podcast about. We used to just text each other lines from the show out of context, and that was just all we did. No context around them, just the line, and we kind of we loved it. It was so good getting that line. And Miles and I were lucky that we actually met each other in real life, and we both knew each other, and we both liked the shows independently. Whereas most people we find, because there's so few of them relatively, they're dotted about in place to place, and they don't know anyone personally who kind of likes the shows as well. So again, your article kind of sums it up brilliantly, I think.
Do you have Tom, do you have sort of friends who are into the shows? Or
no, I do. Most of my male friendships are built on shared taste in comedy. I mean, The Office and Alan Partridge and that sort of thing. That was big for me and my mates at the time. But I honestly, none of my close friends listened to it. And I've said it, I've sort of recommended it a lot. But people, I don't really know anyone. So I was really interested to sort of find your podcast and realize that actually there is this kind of subculture, this sort of fandom, which I didn't really like. I haven't, obviously I would fit right in, but I haven't really been aware of it. Yeah, so it's nice to know that there are other people.
You're not well, we get upwards of 3 listeners a week, so you know there's a big community out there. One thing you touched on, like when you're talking about the podcast that they did, which was hugely successful, and my favourite bit of your article is towards the end where you said the Ricky Gervais show left XFM for good in 2005 and relaunched as a no holds barred, hugely successful podcast with the reins completely off. And the podcast and later animated TV version never had the same edge as the XFM original, lacking that sense of them pushing their luck and just about getting away with it. That's a great comment for us. And we deliberately said, Miles and I, when we did this, we're going to go through every show that they've done, starting on series 2 and 3, 4, go back to series 1. But we're not ever really going to go onto the podcast episodes because they lack something. I think you summed it up really well, what they lack. And also we don't mind the swearing, but it's funnier when the swearing's subversive rather than Ricky just saying the C word over and over and over again. Yeah. They're not as special and meaningful as the XFM shows, but they're much more well known.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's I've never been as fully on board with them. It just is. And I think the other thing, because with XFM there is a sense of naughtiness of them. They are getting away with it and sort of pushing as far as they can. But the other thing is, I think there's a bit of a dynamic shift as it goes on as well. And I tend to prefer the sort of series 1, series 2 XFM shows where they're still sort of discovering Carl and they're still very pally with him. They're still very nice to him. And I think the dynamic starts to shift a little bit and it gets in places a little bit nasty. And I always find the later podcast to be much more, well, let's just be quite unpleasant to Carl Wilkinson, you know.
Yeah, for the sake of it. And a bit contrived.
Yeah, it's just I just don't enjoy the dynamic quite as much.
Yeah, it's not as real and natural as it is. I agree with you in series. And we decided to start on series 2 because we felt that it's the best series really, because series 1 you're building up to that and you're kind of creating that dynamic, but series 2 it's kind of there and in place. As the series progress, we've said it gets more and more contrived, and as you say, more nasty. Series 2 certainly is such a classic body of work.
Yeah, I'm midway through series 2 again at the minute. So
okay.
I was trying to listen to as many as I could in preparation for coming on to chat to you guys.
Any favourite moments of series 2 that you can think of?
I think the most recent thing, I've just come past the sort of the Christmas. I mean, I really like the Christmas Rockbusters. Is that series 2?
Yeah.
It's like such and such stuff. Oh, and have a good Christmas.
That is shit, Carl. I'm sorry, I know it's Christmas.
Foreigner.
Yeah, and
Foreigner.
The story about the box of condoms as well when they come back is very funny.
That's a classic.
My favourite part of your article, Tom, because it's an interesting angle as well. And I think also everything kind of now is kind of viewed in that sort of retrospective spectrum. Like I could listen to the shows now and just take them on face value. I'm never looking at it in a modern context. But I like that you said, so now you say these days Ricky Gervais is a self-appointed arbiter of offence in comedy who reaches for the most offensive gags he can think up as proof that he can say whatever he likes. Back in the XFM days, he was less belligerent. He often apologised to listeners in case they were offended by Pilkington's ill-thought-out comments. And as you said, you know, he does get nastier as the shows go on, and certainly when you're dipping into the podcasts. I mean, the amount of swearing and then insults and cruelty, like I can take the bullying in the XFM shows, but it's just such a nastier edge by the time you get to the podcast. Do you have thoughts on how Ricky's changed in his career?
Yeah, it just feels like it's funny with Gervais. Like, really, like he's sort of my comedy hero, really. I mean, he like when The Office came out, it was like the style and the rhythm of it and the delivery, it was almost like it was like I'd never heard it before, but it was like it was designed especially for my sense of humor, you know. So I felt like a bit of a tricky relationship with this stuff in the years since, because I feel like I think part of the problem is that he doubled down. You know, I think there have been a few occasions where he's been called out for stuff where he could have said, do you know what, maybe I got this wrong, sorry about that.
Yeah.
And I think in the early stuff and the XFM shows and like in the Animals stand-up, there is a sense of humility. And I know he puts on this sort of like bravado about, you know, I've got a few quid now and all that sort of stuff. But it is from a position of, you know, he's sort of taking the piss out of himself. But I think now he's so big, famous, and powerful. The sort of dynamic, the power dynamic has shifted a little bit, and I think it does feel like he's doubled down. It does feel like sometimes the comedy, it's like it's so easy, like to come out and do trans material and do stuff about ill kids and that sort of stuff. And I just think it's not about being offended. I just think it's just not that good. It's not that smart.
Yeah, it's not as funny.
Yeah, and the thing with Afterlife is that he is doing basically the same material as he was doing on XFM. You know, it's like, oh, here comes a bit about a noisy eater, or here comes a bit about atheism and that sort of stuff. I find that it's just a bit. But having said all that, some of his stuff just makes me laugh so much. You know, the Office Christmas specials were such a big thing for me. They really just struck a chord at the right moment. It sort of guided what I wanted to do. You know, they sort of encouraged me to become a writer, really. And some of their other stuff as well, you know, like Extras, I was a big fan of as well. And that's the ending of it is because it's quite a cold show. It's like it's purposely, you know, quite cold. It's about quite unlikable people, and then at the end they do this rug pull where it's like it's suddenly full of heart and it's really emotional and it's really brilliant. So yeah, I have had a little bit of a tricky sort of thing with Gervais's comedy over the years. I'm not sure that I'm as big a fan of him now as I have been in the past. So it'd be interesting to see what Afterlife 3 is like. It's massively popular, but it feels, I'm not sure I was that into it.
It's really divided people, actually. Like, obviously, I spend far too much time that is healthy on those Reddit threads, and there's just such a distaste for like Afterlife, and like you say, how easy the comedy is, and compared to the sort of
cliche.
But it's just it's very, very acclaimed series as well. At the same time, you mentioned that The Office kind of got you interested in becoming a writer. Do you have any other sort of like TV like references? Obviously, you mentioned Partridge, and what was it like to get into journalism and to write about TV in that sort of like critical way? Because I love reading this stuff, and it's I'm a huge film buff anyway, but I wonder what it's like that to have that as a career. Like it's quite a cool thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of British comedy has always been a really big thing for me. You know, from sort of growing up with Blackadder. Only Fools and Horses is a big one for me as well. So Partridge, obviously, you know, Peep Show, like, I mean, all the sort of obvious stuff, really. Getting into, I sort of started writing. I wanted to write for TV. I mean, I worked in a shop for 10 years, right? I did retail management for 10 years, and then I decided that I was actually going to try and become a writer. So script writing was what I wanted to do originally. I mean, me and probably, you know, a billion other people. And as time went on, I started to review stuff because it was something I could do and a way to cut my teeth. And I'd read, you know, film magazines for years and years. And then I just sort of fell into journalism like that. And I love writing about TV comedy. I think this thing is, I think my job is really like I sort of enjoy things professionally. I'm very good at like enjoying films and comedy and articulating what it is I like about them. You know, that's what I enjoy doing.
So hard to do though. So I don't know if you like Mark Kermode and the Kermode and Mayo show, but such an art to reviewing something. Like what is the secret to like a great review? Would you say, if you're approaching something in that sort of, with that critical faculty?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, there are a few points I always think, you know, you need to sort of explain what it is, if it's any good. But I think the most important thing really is context. It's like, well, what is the context that a film or a TV show is within, like, and what context are you sort of reviewing it within? You know, what are you holding it up against? What are you comparing it to or contrasting it to? You know, it's no good, you know, reviewing, sort of holding the latest Adam Sandler up against Citizen Kane. You've got to think, well, does it work within the context of Adam Sandler?
Similar.
Yeah. And the thing with the Gervais stuff, you know, like with the XFM, you've got to think of it within the context of, well, The Office was being made at the same time, and, you know, all the other stuff that's come since, and, you know, referencing the fact that Gervais now sees himself as his arbiter of offence. So that's all, you know, the sort of, you know, the context you need to bear in mind. Yeah. But you know, I love it. It's great. I get to watch a lot of comedy, a lot of movies. You know, it's fun, and I get to speak to a lot of interesting people as well. You know, I interview a lot of comedians and a lot of, you know, personalities, and that's always fun as well.
Yeah, do you want a job swap? Me for a while. I'm a student, actually. I'm an old student.
He hasn't had a job for years, Tom. He hasn't worked for years.
No, I don't work. You could get, stuff in. But no, I was going to say, how do you feel then, Tom, that your writing's changed over the years? Or do you feel it has changed over the years as you've gained experience? But also, for example, this piece you've written about the XFM shows, it's very much contextualized within the sort of cancel culture period. So do you feel that a lot of your writing now kind of places things within that context of cancel culture? Or do you feel, you've developed as a writer in that way? Or do you feel you've been forced to change as a writer or just change naturally?
Well, I mean, the cancel culture stuff is interesting. It's just, I write about that sometimes because that's the trending topic of the day. That's what people talking about or sharing about, that's what's newsworthy at the moment. But just, generally as a writer, I guess, I have changed. I'd like to think I'm a better writer than I was when I started. And I don't know, I get to write. I think the thing is, like, as the job's gone on, I've got to do more and more to write more and more about things that I enjoy, like things that are quite close to my heart, things that are favourites of mine. So getting to do, like this XFM piece, or like I got to interview last year, like Vic Reeves.
Oh wow!
Adam Buxton and people like. So getting to do stuff like that, that comes from sort of, I guess, building up some currency, and as you become more professional and better known, I guess, you sort of get opportunities like that. So being able to do things like that have been, a big change, and it's sort of
amazing.
What was Vic like?
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Because I was sort of half expecting him to be a bit grumpy, because
he's quite cold, isn't it?
Yeah, I used to work in a shop that he came into years ago, and he was a bit frosty. And of course, he's not there.
Yeah.
No. And I remember hearing him on a podcast, and he was not. I didn't think he was that great. Anyway, I got him on the phone. He was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. He was so nice.
Oh, fantastic.
And because I was writing about shooting stars. It was the 25th.
Oh, really?
So it was specifically about shooting stars, and I sort of got the impression that he had a lot of. Well, I not got the impression he had a lot of love for it, and a lot of warmth for looking back on the show. And there were some really great stories about guests they'd had on and stuff like that. So getting to speak to him was amazing.
Oh wow! Do you any plans to speak to Bob?
Well, he's got an autobiography coming out, so he probably will be doing interviews. So I don't know if I'll have the privilege, but I would love to, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you've built up a heck of a lot of, as you say, currency. And as you become more successful, you get to do more of what you specifically want to do. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because the fans of our podcast and wider XFM fans, they talk a lot about wanting. So there's a split between those who would like to see a reunion, those who would love them to be reunited today, and those that don't. I'm kind of in the camp that I would not want to see it like them today. The dynamic would be so different in so many different levels, not just like take the podcasts that they did that were different. It would be different on a whole other scale. It would just, you could never recreate that magic again, is my opinion, and I think Mars's as well. But what's your opinion on them getting back together today? Do you want to see it?
I would absolutely listen to or watch it, but I think the dynamic has changed so much. They're just in different places in their career that it would just not. I think it would not have the same. Do you know what I mean? It would not have. It would not be the same. I don't think. But if they're going to do it, I'll have a listen.
I'd listen to it, but I wouldn't crave it.
I think. It's this thing about Gervais doubling down as well. I just think he might be slightly unbearable on it. I think of it
slightly.
If it happened now.
I never got on well with this, because he's doing that thing with Sam Harris, isn't he, at the moment? I feel like I'm being preached to at the moment by Gervais. Just feel like he's like a pseudo intellectual academic type, and that's always the problem I think you get with comedians these days. It's not about. It's what's so great about Vic and Bob. It was just, to me, that's like another authentic type of comedy, because it's so surreal and wacky and childlike, but it's really bloody hard to do that as well.
And there's no arrogance, there's no pretense to it. It just is what it is.
I think this is part of the thing with Afterlife as well. I think there's a little bit of, it's basically him wandering around and being told that he's right.
I'd love that.
It's kind of just, I don't know, it's like validation of why he's smart and why he's bang on all the time, and I think that's always sit that well with me.
We say he's really arrogant on the XFM shows, but it's done in a funny way, and that makes such a difference. That turns the arrogance from something that sort of puts you off, that's a negative, to some, that's really funny, because he's kind of arrogant, but then he takes piss out of himself as well, and it's done with the humor. But now it seems that the arrogant side seems to be there, but without the humor.
I mean, I know it's an act, I know it's an act. I mean, when I say, in Afterlife, I mean, I do mean it's the character as opposed to Gervais himself. But I do think it's this thing of the act, that sort of act of being, I've got loads of money, I'm really successful, this stuff. It's not quite, it's just not as funny now that he is mega successful.
Yeah.
But then, when I went back and I hadn't watched The Office for a while.
It's always a treat.
And when I rewatched it, I mean, it's just so special to me, and just
just genius.
So I sort of, having done that recently, I regained some warmth for Gervais as well, because it was a reminder of just how much his comedy has sort of meant to me over the years.
It's nice to have that separation and that ongoing appreciation. Like, you will still always cherish Ricky from 02 to 05 where compared to now, because otherwise I think it would be so unfair to just be so dismissive of everything, because he's so prolific. You can't it's hard to take that away from him, I suppose. But
I guess the other thing as well is that probably my comedy tastes have changed as well.
That's true.
When I was 20, saying the most outrageous thing possible was hilarious. I thought that was hilarious, And now I'm a bit older, and I sort of see things from a different perspective, and probably a bit, would like to think from a more informed position in regards to some of those sort of more sensitive issues. Probably my tastes have changed, and I don't, that was his last stand-up when he was doing the stuff about the ill kids. Like,
he really pushes it.
I just don't. It's not something that I will find funny now. Whereas, 15 years.
Well, I love that your line that it was I don't have it from the self-appointed arbiter of what's offensive, like in comedy. That's such a great way of putting it, because he is that in his own head. But to be fair to him, he's been mega successful at that, and his shows are still successful. But he'll always, as you said as well, he'll always be a comedy hero to me personally for what he did with the X-Fem shows and The Office. And The Office, I think, is the greatest piece of art that I've ever seen. And I think we're similar ages when it came out, it's 40 years. It's just so different to everything else. And so he'll always be a hero. But and where your piece is so good is it's kind of not just gushing praise of someone who is your hero. It's actually very nuanced.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the other thing is I think at the time there was this thing about in The Office, and they do it in XFM, where they're kind of pushing the boundaries all the time and getting away with this sort of challenging topics like racism and homophobia and disableist attitudes, and they're challenging it with this sense of irony and tackling it head on. And at the time, I mean, that felt absolutely crucial. It felt like a revelation to hear people talking about those issues like that, so tackling them head on. And it's sort of but when I look back now, I wonder, was it just people from a position of privilege just getting away with saying what they wanted under the pretense of under this sort of thin veil of irony? So I mean, I just think that's that says a lot about how comedy taste in comedy have changed as well. So but at the time, it was all that sort of stuff seemed like
fresh.
A revelation in TV comedy.
How do you see that the future of comedy? Because you're definitely seeing more comedy dramas, I would argue. I don't know how I feel about new where do you feel it's sort of going?
I don't know. I mean, I wish there was more TV comedy. I mean, this is the biggest problem, is that it doesn't get commissioned enough. But there is good stuff around. I mean, I don't know if I've got a particular hot take on the direction it's going. I mean, there's still good comedy being made. I just think not enough of it. I'm not somewhat, I don't know where I fall on the sort of the offence issue, really, because I'm of the belief that no topic should be off the table, right? I mean, art and comedy is how we make sense of difficult things. That's what it's there for. That's why so much of the world's great art is about painful subjects or difficult subjects. So I think the question, to borrow a phrase from Jurassic Park or paraphrase, just because you can't, you spent so long thinking about whether you could, you stop to think whether you should. Just because you can say something, should you? Do you know what I mean? Can you put yourself in the position of someone that this comedy is going to affect or going to upset, you know. And I think that's something that Gervais has struggled with, and certainly that he doubled down on over the years. But I personally think everything should be on the table, but it doesn't necessarily mean that comedy needs to be unpleasant and offensive for the sake of it. And I think there's some really brilliant stuff being done. I loved This Country. I thought it was amazing. I really liked it. And it's something that The Office did. It's sort of, the royal family as well, I would say, but they sort of gave British sitcom heart, you know, like it needs that sort of pathos and it needs that sort of emotion. And even Partridge came, you know, as the years went on, he became a lot more relatable and there's a lot more emotion, and I think we've all become more emotionally connected with Partridge, and I think a lot of that dates back to the influence of stuff like the royal family and The Office. So I think that's been a really important contribution, and it's also something I think that Afterlife had a problem with, is that it rushes in for this like emotional stuff, just get straight into it without really building up that currency and earning those emotions that you get with like Tim and Dawn over episodes, you know?
It's so true.
Done perfectly. Yeah. So what did you think? I don't know if you saw this, but Steve was asked on Twitter something like, "What's your worst cliche that you ever see in comedy?" And he wrote something. I can't remember what he wrote exactly, but basically, dead wife trying to get over it, and he was clearly referring to Afterlife. Like,
stop talking about your fucking dead wife.
Wasn't it like something like the worst cliche? And he said something like, looking at photos of loved ones, so you can't. It is a cliche, and it is that thing. I just think Afterlife, it was from the outset, it was kind of like hammering the sort of melancholy and the emotion. I mean, Derek was a bit like that as well. Not very far through that, but so you do need to earn it. You know, you've got to, and that's something that this country did really well. It kind of earns that sort of pathos and stuff, because you're stuck with it. Really felt for the characters by the end of it.
Father Ted, although that was in Ireland, but it was kind of felt like this country. So Father Ted also, in a more slapstick kind of way, I feel kind of hit that emotion at times, especially the ending of the last one.
Yeah, I guess
that's great. They were great days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a fascinating time if you look at the sort of 90s and sort of going into the early 2000s, a fascinating time for sitcom. British, how it changed from studio setup to this sort of like real, it's this realism and real world style thing, and it sort of comes through the royal family and The Office and Phoenix Nights and that Peter Kay thing, and like the studio sitcom scene immediately was just like old hat. If you look at like Fools and Horses did what was meant to be their final Christmas specials in 1996, and they came back in about, I think it was like 2001 or something. It seemed like, firstly they shouldn't have, but it already seemed like so out of date, which it hadn't done just 5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And the sitcom like changed so much in that time, and it all became about the mockumentary and realism and all that sort of thing.
Do you think it slightly became too much about that, and it's almost gone the other way?
Yeah, I think there does seem to have been a little bit of a backlash. I've seen a few comments over the recent years about, now every comedy has to be real life and has to be, mockumentary or this sort of thing. And I guess, it's. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with studio sitcoms or studio make comedy. I can't.
Mrs. Brown's Boys.
I was just going to say, I can't necessarily in recent years. But I'm not sure I think there's too much of it. But there are other ways to do comedy, I guess. Because I would have said a few years ago, probably the mockumentary had been done enough. But then people just do nothing, and this country comes along. You think, well, actually, these are really good.
Tom, I wanted just to sort of wrap up and discuss your favourite movies, because I can't see what poster you've got behind. RoboCop 2. Okay, so we've got a flavour. Cult science fiction movies. Do you have any sort of favourite films that you could mention?
Babysitter with Hulk Hogan. What's the one where he's babysitting?
Mr. Nanny.
Must be Mr. Nanny. That must be.
I'm not sure it would quite break the top 10, but I would tend to say LA Confidential is way up there as a favourite. Yeah. I mean, Jaws. I mean, it's not revelatory, but it's just really probably
timeless,
the best modern films ever made.
What do you think of The Silence of the Lambs?
I love it. Yeah, I've written about it quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, it's such a brilliant film.
Yeah, I like Manhunter a lot as well, which is a really annoying film student thing to say, but I do.
No.
But just as a child of the 80s as well, things like, Ghostbusters, The Lost Boys, Teen Wolf, which is by no means a 5-star film, but it is a big one for me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So, anything like that. I like Bond as well. I'm a big Bond fan.
Okay. Are you looking forward to the new Bond?
I am looking forward to the new Bond. I mean, once again, I could talk about that a lot because I think I feel like he's doing one film too many. I feel like
I'm the same.
I feel like every Bond has a natural life cycle, and I feel like Craig sort of organically came to a close at the end of the last one. But however, I'm game for a good Bond. You know, if they've got something ready, I'm well up for that.
Timothy Dalton life cycle 1. Over. You're out. See you later. Well, who's your favourite Bond?
If I turn the laptop around the other way, you'll see a big Timothy Dalton poster.
That's it.
His two films are, I think, very good. Although I don't know, the thing with Bond is that I think each one, once again, it's all about context, you know, because each era is his own thing. Really, it's difficult to put Octopussy up against Goldfinger, or certainly something like Casino Royale up against A View to a Kill. So they're all very much they've got their own thing, and they've got their own.
What about Pierce Brosnan?
I like Pierce Brosnan.
He was my Bond. I loved the campy.
I like him. Yeah.
Bond.
Well, it's a funny thing with Brosnan because GoldenEye is very good, and it's one of these. Like every few years, Bond needs to reboot, right? It gets too silly, it goes to self-parody, and then it needs to reboot, and that's part of the cycle, right? So you go from it happened with Moonraker, and then they have to go down to sort of bring it back to basics with Three Eyes Only, and then it happened with A View to a Kill into Dalton, and then GoldenEye is this thing where they sort of rebooted it for the 90s, and suddenly it's part of like Cool Britannia, and it's the lads era Bond and all that stuff, you know. So it's totally of the zeitgeist. But I think when you look back at his other films, I think they've aged very badly. The 90s were not.
They are bad.
What do you mean, his films in general, his Bond films? His
Bond films. I think GoldenEye's great. And the thing about Brosnan, he is like, if you built Bond from the ground up, a perfect Bond, he's the man, really.
He looks like,
he's a brilliant Bond, but the films have not aged well, I don't think.
I would agree with you. Although I'd love a laser watch. Who would you like a laser watch?
I think, honestly, bring him back. Let him have his Dark Knight Returns moment. Bring him back to make amends for how miserable his era ended. Bring him back.
Oh, can you imagine? With his dark brooding hair and his Mamma Mia face.
When Daniel Craig was announced as Bond, there's a website, and I've checked it regularly. It's still going, called DanielCraigsNotBond.com. There was so much because he was blonde, basically.
So
it just didn't look like Bond. So I think that's a bit unfair. He's clearly probably, if you just took the actors in terms of how well they can act, literally he probably is the best actor. But I don't know, like comedy, maybe it's become more gritty and real life and lifelike and less slapstick over the years. I
think Bond could do with lightening up a bit. I think this is part of the thing. Yeah. It's very po-faced, like very serious. And I think, I could do with a bit of Roger Moore, to be honest. I could do with a bit of cheeky eyebrow and naughtiness,
Play it again, Sam. Piano calls, that's from the show. But we don't want to take up too much. You've been such a pleasure to talk to you, Tom, and we can talk to you for hours. We'd love to have you on again as well.
Anytime, man. I really appreciate you asking me on. And
that was so interesting. It's great to also have someone on the films. Gary's talking a lot about films, Tom, but he's only ever seen one film, and that's The King's Speech.
It's true. Well, it's not quite true, but I've seen one film in the last few years. I'm just not film. I can't sit through a film. I've got I get my attention span goes, but I have seen The Silence of the Lambs. I've seen films as my show, but I don't tend to see modern films. So thank you for your talk about it, because I've been educated, and but I'm just not a film watcher.
I will ask you before I go. Did you watch? You didn't watch Fighting with My Family then?
Mars keeps saying to me, "Watch Fighting with Your Family." I haven't watched it, no, but I plan to at some point. If I'm going to watch a film, I'll watch that.
Well, I'm a big wrestling fan, and
that's the perfect film.
It's Hulk Hogan, yeah.
So lots of things came together for me for that film, which is very strange. But I liked it a lot.
Yeah, well, Tom, you've got two new XFM buddies. If you want to have a pint, we're definitely up for reading us some quotes. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
And I just want to say, I can't emphasize this enough. Read his article, please. We'll link it in the description. It's so nuanced and so well written. Love it. And thank you again, Tom, for coming on.
Can I just say, Gary, buy the Telegraph.
Thank you, guys. That's very kind of you to say, and thanks again for having me on.
So that was Tom Fordy. Great guy, really nice person, and very interesting as well. And it was an interesting chat and a bit different to guests we've had on before, I think. Don't you think, Mars? Because he's still in an official, like he's in a proper media position, but he's a true fan in a way that no one else, even Richard Anderson, doesn't listen to the shows these days, really. And Tom is a true XFM geek, a little nerdlinger, and a really nice guy as well.
And it's just interesting to hear that sort of critical voice from someone who's made that their career, essentially. Someone who's got that sort of that reviewer kind of mind. And I could have easily talked to him about about comedy and TV and film especially. And what an amazing job that you get to write, essentially making what you like to watch your passion, and your passion is your work. I was truly jealous of that. I would love to do that on. I mean, we've kind of done it with this pod, but it's not financially stable enough to make it our career.
That $1 goes far, my friend. Each $1 adds up.
Hey, I will not sniff at $1. I will not sniff at $1.
Yes, you bloody well were earlier. But were you impressed that I sort of engaged with him on films? Seriously,
I was proud of you. I mean, to be fair, you mentioned 2 films that you've seen: Silence of the Lambs and King's Speech. Right.
And the other one was The Birdcage. If I had to be pressed on a third, that was the
we should have asked him about The Birdcage, shouldn't we? I wanted to ask him about Lost in Translation, and because that's my favourite film of all time. But maybe he'll come on the show again. He said he would. So and he's got himself a couple of XFM buddies at the end of it. Before we wrap up, a couple of little developments that have happened in the interim. Our friend Jack Bromfield. And I did get his name right there.
Is it? Yeah, you pronounced his name wrong, didn't you?
I did. I'm so sorry, Jack, man. I've got to remember a lot of things in my day-to-day life. Birthdays. He's hosting another XFM pub quiz at the Dove Pub in London, which is just by Broadway Market or on Broadway Market. And this time, although the questions are going to be on Series 2, so, these shows that we're reviewing currently. Last one went down a storm. Think this one will be just as good, and hopefully a few more of you can pop down, and hopefully we can pop down this time. It's going to happen in October. I'll put a link into the description of times and prices, because there is an administration charge, of course. Yeah. But you could win.
Really?
I think it's like £3 to enter. But
okay.
Hey, take that out of the Patreon fund.
Yeah, well, no, we haven't got enough. By all accounts, Jack put on a really good quiz last time. I was really impressed with how many people he got, just for that, and the fact he came up with all the questions, and it we weren't there, but it apparently went down very well. So very impressive, highly impressive, Jack, and well done for putting it on. And we might see you there. Yeah, well, I don't commit to anything more than half an hour into the future.
Or relationships, or
no, I do. They just don't. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you everyone for listening. Please do join us on Patreon. You can listen to Glenn. You can listen to Glenn. All right.
It's Glenn.
I don't know. We're on Twitter, Spinners Podcast, there, where we post loads of nonsense and tweets that go with varying levels of success. Please do rate, review, and subscribe on Apple. I'd love to get some more reviews on there for my ego, and to get the word out there, the good gospel of the what is it?
Trout Spinners. You forgot the name.
I'm talking.
DTS. Yeah, you're talking. You're not making sense, man.
Yeah, all right. DTS. That's the acronym.
He's a bit jittery today. I don't know what it is.
I know, I'm nervous.
No, but we're only doing an intro and outro. We've done this. We interviewed Tom earlier. We're both a bit nervous, but no. Just to leave it on this, Tom, lovely fella. Thanks for coming on, and we'll see you with a normal show next week.